Welcome back to Yang Daily. I'll be your host, Alex Cheney, bringing you all the Yang news you need to live your life right. We have a ton of news to cover, and Christmas shopping isn't helping one bit, I will tell you what. I pretty much had to cut it off at an arbitrary point this episode, so hopefully there won't be much Tuesday news and we can squeeze it all into the next episode. Let's get cracking. Shout out to our Tier 3 patrons, Peter Park and Shay Meehan, as well as all our other patrons. It really helps to know that you are in this with me. Another day, another recount. Wisconsin's Dane County finished theirs today, and again, it only widened Biden's lead over Trump. Trump has, as always, promised yet another lawsuit to overturn the results, but he has no more evidence of fraud than in the last 40-some lawsuits. Do you remember the paid leave that we talked about yesterday that has prevented so many infections? Well, it's one of the many benefits expiring in December as Congress has failed to pass further stimulus to extend it, the eviction moratoriums, financial aid, and so much else. 87 million workers are expected to be affected by the loss of mandated paid sick and family leave just as the pandemic is peaking. To add insult to injury, the Government Accountability Office said Monday that the Labor Department's weekly tally of unemployment insurance filings has reflected inaccurate data throughout the pandemic and that jobless Americans are being underpaid by UI. This means that on top of perverse political incentives resulting in a Congress that will not pass necessary stimulus, and on top of them utilizing conditional aid that prevents millions from getting help, delays the aid, and results in all sorts of other errors, the aid has not even been given in full to people who got through the gauntlet of bureaucracy. This is why conditions are bad, and UBI should replace them. Facebook has recently been banning conspiracy theory groups from the platform. Unfortunately, they allowed the groups to thrive for years. It's too late to stop it at the source now. The most recent ban was of a large anti-vaccination group. A report by the London-based nonprofit organization, the Center for Countering Digital Hate, found that the anti-vax movement gained about 8 million followers in 2020 alone. 8 million in under a year. Research shows the anti-vax movement has effectively used the pandemic to reach more than 100 million susceptible Facebook users and seems to be winning the battle for hearts and minds with emotive and manipulative messaging. Neil Johnson, a physicist at George Washington University who studies online extremism, says, quote, "The anti-vaccination network is all about passing on narratives, passing on stories, supporting each other, just like an insurgency," end quote. Interesting coming from a physicist, but clearly I can't speak. I majored in physics, and here I am. But back to the point, this rise of conspiracy theory culture and faith-based reasoning is the destruction of civilization in real time. Not only is the anti-vax movement a literal plague on human health, it's part of a much larger movement into faith-based reasoning, the rejection of empirical evidence and scientific reasoning, and embracing of beliefs that rest on faith rather than proof. When this manner of thought, mostly relegated to religion until now, extends into everything else, you get Donald Trump, authoritarianism, and death cults railing about masks and denying the existence of a virus killing millions. And it only gets worse if nothing is done to reverse it. Censorship will not do the job. Major reforms are required. For what it's worth, The Guardian put out an article to help everyone in de-radicalizing the conspiracy theorists in our own lives. It emphasizes that many conspiracy theories arrive from feelings of uncertainty and fear. This is why reforms to reduce these causes of unrest, such as UBI and democracy reforms, reducing financial anxiety and disenfranchisement, are necessary. It's also why engaging in ridicule or attacks will only drive these people further into their delusions. Just as with hate groups, these conspiracy communities are a type of support group that appeal to people who feel wronged, aggrieved, or isolated. They're looking for support and, unfortunately, found it in a toxic sort of religion. Research shows that starting with empathy and leading into logical criticism, focusing on the logical flaws that have been used to manipulate their thinking, is the most effective. After approaching with respect and, ideally, discovering and expressing concern for the root fear or grievance, one of the simplest critiques is to ask what evidence would convince them that their belief is incorrect. Theorists often believe that they are following evidence, except that they always find excuses to discard evidence that disagrees with their belief and move the goalpost when evidence they point to as proof is debunked. This simple question forces them to face that mentality. Either they will have to commit to something that could falsify their claims, in which case you can look for that evidence, or they will have to admit to themselves that their belief is irrational. Another critique for large-scale conspiracies is to ask if it's reasonable that so many people could keep the secret. For example, the conspiracy theory that the virus is a hoax. That would require millions of people to be in on it, and the vast majority of those people would have no reason to be. In fact, they would have strong incentives to expose such a conspiracy. In the case of something like climate change, you might ask why they believe the few percent of scientists who deny it, who aren't even climate scientists, instead of the almost entire scientific community who acknowledges the evidence is real. And what of the motives of those few dissenters? Do they not gain easy fame from dissenting? Why not be as skeptical of them as of the majority? The critique of equal skepticism also applies to coincidence. Many conspiracy theories, such as the 5G myth, arise from a confusion between correlation and causation. Many believe that 5G causes COVID simply because they arose at the same time. But what of all the other things that happened at that time? Why are these two events connected and not all the rest? Why not say COVID is caused by certain actions in the stock market, or a baby being born, or whatever else happened at the time? It becomes pretty clear pretty quickly that the events are being connected arbitrarily, and that the timings are really just coincidence like all the rest. As another example, the anti-vaccination campaign we were just discussing began based on autism diagnoses happening shortly after certain vaccinations. In reality, those vaccinations and the determinations of autism just happen to be done around the same age. These misdiagnoses of causation are really just the natural tendency for people to look for causes when something dramatic happens in their lives. If the real cause isn't satisfying, such as a virus mutating, some people keep looking for a sufficiently dramatic cause. They usually also want to connect it to something of agency, a person or being with intent. Basically, someone they can blame. It's no coincidence that one of the most effective ways to get someone off of one particular conspiracy theory is to give them cause to blame someone else. It's one reason you see so much demonizing in politics. Finally, the research emphasizes the importance of maintaining open dialogue. If the discussion gets to a point where they start to get hostile or upset, leave it for another day. De-radicalization takes time, even with those not yet severely radicalized. Don't expect to rehabilitate in a single session. Maintain good relations and trust first and foremost so you can maintain a positive influence on them. I'll also say, don't put undue responsibility on yourself. We all need to do what we can to de-radicalize our peers, as faith-based reasoning is a runaway train to the Dark Ages, but don't hold yourself to an unreasonable standard. As in all things, do what you can and be satisfied with that. One thing you can do is share this thread and article both offline and online with everyone you know. We're all part of society and we all need to be prepared with the tools to keep it healthy. The Scottish National Party, a political party in favor of Scotland separating from the UK, just issued a call for the Scottish government in that event to adopt a 32-hour workweek. It's great to see support for both this and UBI spreading like wildfire across the world. The hold of workism is weakening. There can be no greater advancement in quality of life at large than the collective realization that employment should not be the focus of our lives. As well, the consumer goods company Unilever has launched a year-long trial of a 32-hour workweek in their branch of 81 staff in New Zealand. Unilever says that they will use the results to determine whether to expand the change to their other 155,000 employees. Guyana has become the most recent nation to adopt direct cash relief during the pandemic, joining the likes of Japan, South Korea, Serbia, Hong Kong, and Singapore. Guyana is giving $25,000 per family to those who lost work due to the pandemic. Government officials say they see the money already finding its way back into the economy. Minister of Parliamentary Affairs and Governance, Gail Teixeira, expressed the economic value of unconditional aid well, saying, quote, "Every time a person gets money, they will spend it. The people decide how to spend it, and the money circulates in the economy. It allows the spending power of the people to be improved, business people to open up and buy more and rehire workers sent off because of COVID. End quote. In other words, it makes the decentralized intelligence of capitalism work better while ensuring quality of life for all, or at least a UBI would. And speaking of UBI, Northern Ireland's Antrim Newtown Abbey just became the 5th local council passing a motion in support of both an emergency UBI and a UBI trial for all of Northern Ireland. UBI Lab strikes again. In the States, Penn's School of Social Policy and Practice is jumping on UBI by launching the Center for Guaranteed Income Research to find data-based support for guaranteed income policies by studying the impacts of direct cash relief programs in cities across the country. The center was launched in collaboration with Mayors for Guaranteed Income. Researchers will study pilot programs in MGI member cities to garner support and address knowledge gaps in Americans' understanding of guaranteed income. After 2 years of collecting data on the guaranteed income pilots, the center will use the findings to support evidence-based policy proposals that focus on direct cash payments to American households. They will primarily study the effects on financial stability, health, food security, parenting and family dynamics, and educational outcomes. Once the guaranteed income pilots conclude, the center will remain a long-term advocate. The center says that the launch was inspired by an urgent need to match the gap between public momentum for cash transfers and some unanswered questions about how guaranteed income functions in our current economy. As usual, when guaranteed income is involved, I have mixed feelings. I appreciate any advocacy for unconditional aid, and more proof is great. But I have to ask, at what point will the evidence be enough if it isn't already? We didn't have to do years of trials before enacting Social Security. It's past time to do a national trial of UBI. Start with a small dollar amount and observe. Ramp up from there. The risk will be minimal and the actual effects can be studied. If nothing goes wrong, we'll have our UBI, however large economic productivity can afford. No need even to tax, it can be done with new money. This should be a no-brainer. Finally, the holiday walk for UBI has completed with a collective 7.8 million steps accumulated. Thank you to all who participated. Keep them coming, and let's take those steps in the direction of a Democratic Senate so we can start making the changes that will get us to a functioning government and real solutions. And that'll do it for today's Yang Daily. Bookmark and share the conspiracy theory thread. Congratulate UBI Lab on another job well done. Keep putting in the steps on the Watt app. Don't forget to put in your half hour a day of phone banking or text banking to support the efforts in Georgia. If you need help, consult Humanity Forward, the Income Movement Aid Database, the Mission Asset Fund, or United Way. And don't forget to Yang Daily.